Good morning. This is Dr. Matthew Dunn, host of The Future of Email Marketing. And my guest today is Tim Kachuriak, CEO of NextAfter. Tim, so nice to connect and talk. Thank you for coming aboard.
Dr. Dunn, happy to be here, man.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about NextAfter for starters.
Yeah, so NextAfter is really three things. So we are a fundraising research lab, we're a consultancy, and we're a training institute that helps nonprofit organizations get better at digital fundraising. We believe digital is the future of fundraising, but you'd be surprised, it's still an underdeveloped opportunity in the space.
Now, did you ever do radio? You've got a great radio voice going there.
I've done a few podcasts before. So.
Okay. Okay, there. And I remember I noted the lead line on your LinkedIn profile. I'm obsessed with discovering what inspires people to give. Talk about that a bit.
You think about it, like that is a kind of question that can captivate somebody's imagination and energy for the rest of their lives. And I need that, or else I'm going to go find something else to do. So I've been on this quest.
What are some of the things that you think you know about that right now?
Well, gosh, I feel like we're just scratching the surface. The big thing that I think we've done that may be different is that we've approached digital and basically the entire internet as if it's the greatest behavioral laboratory that's ever existed, because it is, right?
It is, yeah.
Instead of asking people's opinion, like we can actually go run these different experiments and like see how they behave in real life in the wild. So we found that there's not one answer to the question, why do people give? There's a number of different reasons. It's a collective of reasons, if you will, right? And those reasons vary from generation to generation, by organization to organization, by donor to donor, right? So it's really, really hard to kind of pin down like one specific reason why people give, but I'll give you a few examples, right?
Yeah.
So especially older generations like boomers, GIs, they give out of a sense of duty, responsibility. It's the right thing to do. It's what they taught. Their, upbringing, going to church and stuff and putting money in the collection plate. Like that is kind of like their framework for, this is my responsibility to kind of give back.
Yeah.
Other people, they give out of a sense of like wanting to be part of something, this desire to belong, right? This desire to kind of like join a movement or be part of some sort of transformational change.
Yeah.
Some people, especially people that give to political campaigns, they give out of, anger, frustration.
Yeah.
Right. There's a problem in the world. And like, I don't like what these guys are doing. I like what these guys are doing. So I'm going to go give my money to them so that they can go change things either back to the way that it should be or to the way that I think it should be in the future. Right. So there's these different kind of motivation sets.
Interesting.
But underneath all of it, there's things that we found to be effective regardless of what the ingoing motivation of the donor is. Right. So things that you probably talk about all the time in the for-profit space are kind of like, new like lightning bolts that are hitting us in the nonprofit space, like the power of a value proposition. Right. So through testing and experimentation. So like the simple way that we think about value proposition is that the donor, and who's our customer, right? So in the nonprofit space, the donor is our customer. They're constantly weighing the perceived value of giving a donation versus the perceived cost.
Yep.
If they perceive more value than cost, they give. More cost than value, they bail.
Yeah.
But it's not just at the the macro decision to give or not to give, but it's at every single one of the little micro decision junctions that they encounter along the way.
Okay.
So I'll relate it to, your topic du jour, right? So like email, right? So I send an email, right? Now the goal of this email is to get you to go online to my website and make a donation. The first micro decision that somebody has to make is, do I want to open that email, right?
Yeah.
And if they make a decision to open, they have to make a decision to read and to keep reading, and then maybe to click. And if they click, they get to a landing page, and there's a series of decisions that they navigate: content, copy, images, video, whatever's on the page. If the content's compelling, if it's inspiring, if it moves them in some way, they click the donate button. And there's still yet a series of these micro decisions, even as the donor goes through completing the transaction. So we know by looking at all this nonprofit industry benchmark data that less than 25% of the people that click the donate button on a nonprofit's website actually complete the transaction.
Okay. That's a pretty high percentage anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. But the reason why is because there's still a series of decisions they have to make even at that final stage of completing the transaction.
Yeah.
Right. Do I want to make a one-time gift or a recurring gift? How much I want to give? That's the one interesting thing about nonprofits is we don't have a fixed price.
Yeah. That's true.
Our
That's
price
true.
is determined by the customer. The donors decide how much they're going to give.
Yeah.
And what we find, the biggest thing that influences both whether they give and how much they're going to give is how effectively and forcefully we communicate their value proposition.
Now,
So,
I want to reel back to something you said at the beginning. Actually, finish that sentence and let's reel back a little bit.
no, that's good. We can go. Let's go reel it in.
Yeah, you were talking. I wanted to parse it a little bit. You were talking about the goal of the email. You said near the beginning, you get them to click and go to the website. Let me counter argue, and I think you'll agree with me that's somewhere in the goal for the potential series of emails, but that perception, relationship, brand awareness, cause awareness, all of those things are also objectives for those messages. You don't necessarily expect people to hit the donate button or click to the website on message number 1, right?
In some cases, yes, we do expect them. Yeah, I mean, like, the nonprofit fundraising space, we're still kind of like very much locked into a direct response kind of mindset.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the luxury of like being consumer brand with like billions of dollars to spend in creating brand awareness. So I've got to go from like you meeting me from the first time to us like getting married. I mean, it's like that is like, wow, that's kind of like the challenge. So, and if you think about how most nonprofit organizations have traditionally done broad-based fundraising, it's been through direct mail, right? Yeah, I'm going to go rent a list. I'm going to go send 100,000, 1 million pieces of mail. And I'm hoping for like maybe a 1% response rate.
Yeah.
Which is 99% failure rate, but yet that's success.
Thank you. Us, yes. It's like, whoa.
So what I'm obsessed about is like, okay, great. So you can get your 1%, but like, what do I do to make the other 99% like say yes as well? And that's where like the testing and optimization, experimentation have become really, 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 really important.
Yeah, and the digital domain, which you said you focus on when we were chatting before we started here, has a level of measurability that analog never had.
Never had that, right? I know it's getting harder to measure. We're actually kind of going backwards in time, which is a whole separate conversation.
That's a whole separate conversation,
right? But yet still today, we still can, track certain kinds of behaviors that and it adds a whole layer and a whole dimension of targeting capability and relevance that you can create in every sort of message based on these behaviors that people are illustrating through their behavior online.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that struck me a few years back, I think I was talking to a bunch of kids at a business school class at the university here or something like that. And I said, like, you don't realize that, I think they were marketing and business students. I said, you don't realize that you actually signed up for the sciences. Right. Guys, 10 years, 20 years ago, business was not nearly as much a science as it is now.
That's right.
It just wasn't measurable in anywhere near the granularity, immediacy, like almost ridiculous flood of data and statistics that the digital domain has opened up. Like, oh, we didn't plan that, but wow, right?
That's right. No, that's right. I mean, like art kind of generates hypotheses and like science validates them, right? So like that's the kind of like
yeah. Oh, you just froze. I'm going to give Zoom a second. Yep. Art validates, art proposes, science validates, and then Zoom stuttered for a second, so we'll keep going. Now that's well formulated. Do you end up in conversations, let's say, with some of your nonprofit clients, particularly early in the cycle? Are any of them? Do they require a lot of education to get more comfortable with the level of measurability in the digital domain?
Yes, 100%. 100%. So a lot of them have like basic kind of like tracking capabilities in place, like they're using Google Analytics, but they're using it wrong. I usually like refer to like, the average person, like only uses 10% of their brain. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's you're using 10% of your Google Analytics.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's usually one of the first problems we have to fix for them, right? Because you cannot optimize that which you cannot measure, right? Yeah. So it's usually like kind of like tying the wires together and like, connecting the dots so that they can actually be able to get, clear visibility as to what's really happening in their program. So that's usually step one. And then step two, there's usually like tremendous leakage in their funnel, right? Yeah. So like there's so many people that are passing through their organization, but because they haven't like taken the time to optimize the various different digital assets, they're just losing a lot of people. So there's a lot of low hanging fruit, and we
Mm-hmm.
show people this,
Mm-hmm.
and they get really, really, really excited. And that's when they start to divert some of their direct mail budget over to digital, and we're able to kind of help get them some wins and move towards more of a digital first type of strategy.
So that direct mail versus digital is, I've lived in the digital domain way too long. Like that's still viable tension.
Yes. So up until this past year, 2020, which has been kind of like a
Yeah.
a huge sea change.
Yeah.
Digital fundraising has never crossed 10% of total giving.
Wow. Interesting.
In 2020, it was 13% of total giving.
Big
right.
change. Wow.
So it's never crossed 10, and it sailed past 10 to 13%.
Wow.
And last year, so Blackbaud, which is like the big donor CRM company in the space, they do this charitable giving study, and it's based on $40 billion that flow through their CRM system. Last year in 2020, total fundraising revenue went up by 2%.
Okay.
Digital went up. Else was basically down, but digital was what really kind of carried the day, in 2020. And it was because a lot of their traditional tools were taken off the table. I'm not having fundraising events. I'm not flying around the country meeting with all my donors. I've got Zoom and I've got email.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden digital is kind of like right in the forefront of what a lot of nonprofits are thinking about today.
Right. So even in the nonprofit and fundraising domain, we all just got booted 6 to 10 years into the future based on the
I like to say we got a violent shove into digital transformation, right? So
yeah. And I imagine there are adaptations that are not just technical in making that shift, or in changing that weighting of channels, because you can't just take your paper campaign and hit print the PDF and hit send.
You would be surprised by how many even very large organizations do exactly that, Matthew. I mean, it's really, really shocking. And so this is kind of like the big point we try to make, is like, because the barriers to entry to any sort of digital stuff is very low. Like any old fool can, hit the send button, right? Any old fool can go post anything online or make a blog post. The time and the level of attention spent on those channels is very, very low, right?
Right.
And because it's cheap, right? And so we say, look, if you really want to be effective, you need to treat this thing with tremendous respect.
Good for you.
Right? Yeah. And so it's a journey for sure.
And the level of nuance and measurement that really pays off. I'm guessing most of them haven't been ready to do. Didn't realize that it was worth doing.
No, they've been blasting people forever, right? You know what I mean? And that's one of the first things that we try to teach people. Like, if you really want to optimize your digital fundraising, you have to humanize it, right?
Yeah.
You've got to humanize it, because people give to people, not to email machines, not to websites, not to direct mail campaigns for that matter. People give to people. And the more that you understand that, the more you begin to see the ways to adapt that to make it more human.
Yeah. I had a chat with a gent at a nonprofit called Smile Direct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
They do
great organization.
Yeah. And it was interesting. Like, they're very methodical about what they do. And he talked about how they, I think he used the word curate, how they keep track of the stories, particularly of their successes.
Yes.
And can continue to make those the focal content in their fundraising, because it moves people, it touches people, it moves people.
Well, stories is our currency. And actually a lot of ways, stories is our product, right? So like, I like to say, like, our product is the impact that we deliver to the marketplace, and like our customer is the donor, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, that's really the things that we have to work on, is how do we innovate on the product delivery side? Like, how do we get better at, solving the problem of a cure for cancer, or fixing, people that have like deformities because of, maybe poor drinking water, whatever the cause may be.
Yeah.
And so then that's what ultimately is going to drive the effectiveness of, the customer purchase, right? Which is a donation.
Yeah, I like that product is story, and I wish I hope a lot of email marketers listen to that because even in the for-profit domain, it frequently gets just completely dropped, left on the floor.
Yeah.
We spent some time working through a proof of concept with a prospective customer for Campaign Genius, my company. They wanted to take real time content and do a lot more personalization of their email.
Mhm.
But I won't name names. They were lovely folks to work with, but they didn't change the box of what they did in their email at all. It's like this
Mm.
tiny, modest. We'll put their name here, and that's going to change everything. Like, wow! And I
Yeah.
wasn't honestly surprised when it didn't move the dial very much. It's like you're so you centric already in what you send out. Sticking my name on it doesn't mean it's still not mostly about you. I actually said, guys, measure the pixels, like measure the number of pixels that are different, because I
Yeah.
did, and you're hoping a 3% change is going to make 100% difference. It's not going to. Sorry.
No, if you
Yeah.
test small, then the results are small, right? So
Yeah.
like we,
Yeah.
we usually advocate for like starting with like a radical redesign. Like let's go
Nice.
blow up our presuppositions, right? Let's
Nice.
go like if you have a highly designed email, which is what most nonprofit fundraising emails look like, we advocate for stripping all that away. Get rid
Yeah.
of the images, get rid
Yeah.
of the graphics, get
Yeah.
rid of the buttons, and even rewrite the copy so it sounds like it's coming from one
From a
human to another
person. Yeah.
human.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've run that test
Uh huh.
with dozens of organizations. We've done it in different countries. We've done it in different languages.
Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 500% increase in donor response by just making that one simple little design change.
Which is not that simple a design change, right? Because it really is a blow everything up. And I would imagine,
But it's easier. It's just a text-based appeal versus, having to go get a designer and create your video and all that other crazy stuff. Like we're
yeah,
just like, look, just write it like you're writing to a friend.
yeah. The voice, and the power of language, probably to tell the story, which, as you said,
Exactly.
is the product. And and getting people to stop and read takes some craft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, copywriters earn their keep. Let's put it that way.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. It's as we see more and more AI and machine generated language. I was just reading an article this morning about yet another platform that's like plug in the keywords and we'll write the article. I'm thinking, no, you won't. You won't write something I'll read or that anybody
Right.
will read. Right? You'll spew out English and eventually the waterline will keep going like this and it'll get harder and harder to get me to actually track through that.
Exactly. But like it's also kind of like there's some interesting, research being done like in the area of neuroscience, right? And they talk about like the impact of story. So like first of all, as it relates to nonprofit fundraising, there's a chemical released in somebody's brain
Mm-hmm.
when they give a donation, right? It's oxytocin. This is
Yeah.
exactly. It's the compassionate
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
neurotransmitter. It's the bonding
Cuddling.
neurotransmitter, right? It's this really special stuff. So I'm like, man, that's great. How do we start dosing our donors with oxytocin? I came up with a whole bunch of like illegal ways to do it, but there's actually a very legal way to do it because like oxytocin release can be triggered by effective storytelling, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just fascinating kind of stuff. So, and I'm sure it's true on the commercial side as well, right? Like, effective storytelling, like people, they don't buy products for the benefits and all that stuff. They buy it because it's part of their identity. It's because they see themselves, a certain way in the world and they want to demonstrate that by, having this thing or making this purchase or going on this trip or whatever that thing may be. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that storytelling could be really interesting thing to add into like, I think there's a lot of things, let's put it this way. I think there's a lot of things that commercial marketers can learn from the nonprofit space. And I know that we have a ton to learn from the commercial space. So this could be a cool partnership.
Well, the commercial space, and I mean, I in some senses, I get to sit on the side of it because as a technology vendor to those marketers, I see what they do, but the technology itself isn't inherently for one or the other. They're guilty of they being commercial email marketers, frequently guilty of still doing a lot of blasting, as you said early on.
Mm-hmm.
Frequently guilty of being on such a hamster wheel of production that stop, blow it up, rethink like and humanize yourself is so it's almost too much work. They tend to have, and I'm guessing your larger nonprofit clients have this as well. The brand police play way too big a role. It's got to look like this and have that fun. And by the time they get one HTML template crafted that delivers that, they're scared to death.
It's a mutation. I know, right. Well, that's where we suggest to our clients to use testing as both a sword and a shield. Like what I mean by that. So like it's a shield in the essence of like, the boss wants to go change everything, right? He's going to go bet the farm on, we're going to go in this direction. We're like, let's go test that first. Right.
Yeah.
And then you go test it and you bring back the data and say, hey, this kind of like actually reduced our conversion rate by 75%. You still want to do that? No. Right. So like that's the shield. And then the sword is like all of these entrenched, sacred cows. You can go slay them and just destroy them with this sword of testing and say, look, the old way of doing things is gone. And this is the new way. And we're going to test it first because, we want to validate the concept, but it's pretty hard for people today in today's world to argue with data. It really is.
It is. But here's where I see, an overlap between the nonprofit and the for-profit email marketer. Both of them don't tend to allocate the resources required to actually be able to test.
That's why they hire companies like us, Matthew.
That's why they hire companies like you. No, I mean it really is kind of baffling. You look at the digital digital monopolies that have been effective at growing. Google is immediately the one that jumps to mind, and there's a willingness to invest in that. That invisible, humble-looking R&D called, we need to have enough people to send 2 versions so that we can A/B test. We need to have enough time to come up with 2 subject lines that we think are killer or 2 layouts that we think are great so that we can then get the data back to say which one is better. And I see a lot of, oh crap, we barely got this one out the door and we're on to the next one. I'm like, when do you actually have time to test? Like the stuff tested in email is relatively modest to my mind.
Yes. I mean, that's right. People resort to kind of things like subject line testing or maybe sender or time of day, things that are like kind of easy to control. But if you really want to move the needle, you gotta get at the meat of like the message, the value proposition, the story, like adding different emotional cues and priming and framing and all these like different kind of behavioral economics kind of concepts. Right? And you're right. It takes time. It takes effort.
It takes time and effort. Yeah. And it clearly would pay itself back. That's the most effective of the digital marketing channels, but because it's cheap, which you said early on, I think there's a tendency to while it's it's cheap, it's free, and I already know how to send an email, so you guys get this much to work with. Good luck, bring us the numbers back. Oh, exactly. Ouch, right? Yeah. And on the longer haul, that long-term relationship side of email marketing, because the inbox is a fairly intimate channel, to be fair.
Yep.
The less you invest in that, I suspect the greater the decline, the churn out of the list, and so on.
Big time. I'll give you an example of that exact thing. So we had this organization, very large nonprofit organization. If I mentioned the name, you'd probably know them. They approached us. They said, "Hey, we're in trouble. We need some help." So our email engagement and response rates have fallen off a cliff, and we have no idea why. Right. And so we took a 6-month snapshot of data and we looked at their email send volume, and other than like the time around like year-end fundraising season, which is like the big heavy time for a lot of nonprofits. Yeah. They were sending a consistent volume of email. Right. Okay. Then we overlaid 2 additional pieces of data. One was the percentage of people that delete the email message before even opening it. The other one is the percentage of people that open and read the message. And what we noticed is the red line, the number of people that delete right before even opening, was consistently above the green line, which is the percentage of people that open and read. And those 2 lines were getting further and further apart as we kind of stretch out that 6-month time window. And then we overlaid another piece of data, which was the average inboxing rate of their messages.
Okay.
At the start of the 6-month window, they were receiving on average across all the different ESPs, like I think it was like 78% average weighted inboxing. Okay.
Yeah.
By the end of that 6-month window, 38%. And so we said, you guys are sending too many emails. You need to slow it down. They were sending 2 fundraising emails per week.
Wow. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they said, thanks, but no thanks. We can't do that. We have these aggressive revenue targets we have to hit. We have all this pressure and we can't afford to not keep sending these emails, because every time we send an email, we get revenue, right? Regardless of how it's declining. And we said, okay,
wow.
How about you send more? And they said, okay, now you're talking, right? Like we said, okay, we want you to send 1 additional email every single week, but this email cannot ask for money. The only thing this email can do is provide value back to the donor. Now, that may be in the form of like giving them a special piece of content or report on what's happening or ask them a question or send them a certain, it's basically engagement kind of content, cultivation content.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we ran the experiment for 6 months. They put that in place, and their email response rates went up by 80%.
Wow.
Across all their segments, the donors, non-donors, and lapsed donors. Yeah. Their average engagement in email went up over 100%. So meaning people that are opening and clicking. And again, this is not by sending any more appeals. This is just by adding a bit of cultivation content. So the problem of email list hygiene is a huge, huge, huge problem in our space, because we are constantly blasting, because we don't think we have time to do any sort of brand kind of content or value add content. But that's the big difference maker for a lot of these organizations, is adding that into the mix.
And so not always just saying, click to our website and donate.
That's right.
Right. But like keep that, the cliche phrase, but keep the relationship component to it. Wow. Exactly. Was it a lot of, knocking heads and brainstorming to figure out how to meet we need to keep going and try and rectify the drop at the same time? And it seems like a great solution.
Yeah, it was. And the cool thing is, this organization, to their credit, they were open to testing, right? They were open to running the experiment. And it was a longitudinal experiment. I mean, it took place over 6 months. So it was a pretty big commitment. Yeah. But I think their backs were against the wall, and like they didn't see any other solution, right? So
it was really you're not going to meet the fundraising goal if the lines keep diverging.
Exactly.
As you said, and if the the inboxing percentage keeps dropping like that, and that would have been a tough experiment to run in paper mail for sure.
That's right. It would take years.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, cool. There's a book I've noticed that I find myself citing it like every 3 or 4 conversations with people on this podcast. There's a book called The Social Life of Information. You ever run across it?
No.
Oh, you would. I think you'd really like this. John Seeley Brown and Paul Duguid. I'll send you a link when we're done.
Okay, great.
John Seeley Brown was head of Xerox PARC for a good number of years.
Okay.
Like, so birth of the computer kind of place. But the book was written before Facebook existed. And they were trying to understand how we learn from each other, and how organizations make knowledge move across the organization. And the surprise to that, which won't surprise you at all, is it's not the paper manuals and the knowledge management systems and the documentation. It's people hanging out and telling stories to each other.
Yeah. One of the ways that we try to actually foster that at NextAfter is that we provide lunch to all of our staff, right? So we have a huge waste of Class A office space, this huge lunchroom where everybody sits down, and we bring in food every day. Yeah. And like, that's the time where like ideas are happening back and forth. Like I just got off, we had lunch, and one of our guys who is like one of our search engine guys or whatever, he was doing this, he was researching the GTP3 thing or whatever, this AI thing that does all that stuff. And he's like showing me all that, but like I never would have like heard about that unless he would have came and had that conversation at lunchtime today. So it's like, I think that there's value in creating moments for people to be able to have those conversations.
And that's one thing that has gotten a bunch of pressure in our massive kick forward to digital remote work from home. How are you grappling with that in terms of your organization? That's a tough
Well,
balance.
being in Texas, I know that, like we're in the news a lot for like kind of being like, yeehaw, let's go, but we were back at the office pretty early, honestly. And we came back in stages, like, leadership team first, and then it was open to people if they wanted to come back. And, but pretty much everybody's back in the office now. And, I think everybody's vaccinated. So I think we're in the safer zone, or as safe as you can be. I mean, whatever, but like, I mean, that's a big challenge of working in today's world, is just the physical separation. There's value in proximity, honestly.
There absolutely. It may have been the same social life information book, but I remember reading about a company that, no, it was a study, and I think it might have been social life information. Louis J. Sullivan perfected the skyscraper in Chicago back in the teens and 20s, and inadvertently destroyed collaboration to a great extent, because when you've got buildings under 5-6 stories where people go up and down on a stairwell, you have stairwell conversations. And when you get an elevator, nobody has conversations in the elevator. And
that's right.
And one company that I read about was like deliberately capped their building height in their office buildings and made sure they built around stairwells for the same reason you allocate that lunchroom space.
That's fascinating. Interesting.
Right? Because you bump into the guy and, hey, Fred, and blah, 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 R&D, what are you guys working on? Oh, wow, that's fascinating. Gee, maybe we could use it, right? You don't have those in elevators, and you don't have them in Zoom, which is a real problem, right?
Nope, you're in, you're out. That's it.
You're in, you're out. Yeah, it's intentional. There's an agenda.
Very transactional.
And you've got all these screens and distractors and peripheral information, and actually having the conversation and focusing on the conversation.
And I don't have pants on right now, Matthew. So it's like...
There you go. Yeah. And that certainly informs the conversation as well. That's awesome. Well, kudos to you for getting, for building a company and a culture where people are back in the office, because not all companies are having an easy time with that.
Yeah. I think it was because, we're a smallish company. 40-ish employees and stuff. So like, I think, there's this camaraderie that has been established through the lunchroom program. Honestly, I think that's been like the biggest thing that's really helped aid our culture, because we don't have a lot of the cattiness that you see in a lot of other like office settings. Yeah. And you sit down next to somebody different every day, so it's just kind of like I get to know all my staff, and they know me, and it's like it's a cool kind of vibe. Nice
leveler, and really for the benefit, not that big an investment.
In the grand scheme of things, you consider the amount of money that like companies waste on consultants and like all these crazy programs designed to kind of foster engagement that everybody rolls their eyes at, and like, oh, great, team building 99 again. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of a cool way to do that.
And at a human, story donor level, break bread together is that's a pretty fundamental thing. Like, we're wired to do that, and it matters great deal. Yeah, sure does. Man, did I miss it during the pandemic. Still, like, we're not fully out of it in terms of our own behavior. I'm like, I'm really kind of bored with me.
It's probably good for podcast bookings, though, right? So I'm sure that you got a lot of podcast conversations recorded during the pandemic.
Interesting, because we didn't start the planning for this, the future of email, until like circa September or so, and then we didn't really get it up on its feet and start having guests come on board until January. And someone asked the other day, well, like, is this really paid? They were asking the business question, has this really paid off? What's the ROI? And I'm like, I don't really know, and I'm not sure I actually really care at this point, because what it's become is a terrific conversation opportunity to have lunch, so to speak, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Would we have met and been able to, talk for this length of time? Not if it involved airplanes and like all that other mission.
Yeah, we could have bumped into each other at a conference or something. Like, oh yeah, call me sometime. You know what I mean? Like that might have happened, but this is this does create a new opportunity for those conversations. You're right.
It does, and that's its own best reward. Like the rest of it, like what'll happen will happen. But man, there's a whole list of people like, wow, I had the best conversation with. I get to do another one tomorrow. Yay!
Cool. Gary Vee talks about like the reason why he does all these podcasts, and he's like, because it forces me to think. You know what I mean? Like, first of all, I get to refine my story, I get to refine my message, but sometimes people ask a question I haven't thought about before, and it takes me in these different directions, and all of a sudden, like the synapses start firing, and I'm like, I've got this new breakthrough, right? So I think it's like there's value in that, like just continuing to meet people and networking. I mean, that's like not a new concept, but this has created a new venue for networking and conversation,
and a venue without the false intentionality of live networking frequently has.
Right.
Like conferences where someone's sort of cruising looking for the badge so they can strike up a relationship just tick me off. Like, no, you're not. You're like, you want to talk to me because you think X, Y, and Z. Or you're like, we're not actually talking.
Right.
We're talking past each other, and that's kind of a massive bore by comparison.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's right. So it's superior in that aspect. Right.
It is, but I think, and I'm just formulating this as we talk, it may be more useful in those cross-company, cross-organizational settings like the two of us talking than for two colleagues within a company to have this as their sole means of connection. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it sounds like you're already there in terms of how your own team works together, back together, having lunch together and stuff like that. Was there a sense of a bit of relief and yay, we're back as people started coming back into the office?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, just because of like the nature of our culture, I think we all missed each other. We tried to do the virtual lunch thing, which was like a disaster,
virtual beer. No.
Yeah. So just like, it just stopped happening. And I think everybody like felt that void of this thing that was missing from their day. And, when you work from home, you lose all sense of reality of time and, space and everything. And sometimes you just sit down in the chair and you're cranking all day long. And next thing you know, it's like dinner time, right? And you haven't even got up other than to go to the bathroom or something. And like, that's honestly the reason why I started doing lunch. Like when I started my own business, I used to work at other agencies, and it was like, there'd never be time for lunch. If anything, I'd run down to the third floor coffee shop, grab a crummy sandwich, and like eat it at my desk on yet another conference call.
Yeah.
So I'm like, when I start my own business, like I'll know that I've arrived when I can have lunch every day. And then I started adding staff, and we just kept going out to lunch every day. Right. And then as it got too big, we started bringing the lunch in, and it just like, it's good for people physically, right? To take that break, to feed, to have sustenance, right? So that then, and it breaks up the day so well. I mean, like, the morning, then you focus and you crush it, and you like, everybody blocks that noon, time to make sure that they're available. And then you get the rest of the day and you feel energized and charged and ready to rock.
Yeah. And I would guess you go a long ways towards snapping the perpetual screen connection with that lunch as well, because that's just insidious. And back to the Zoom thing for a second. Aside from one-on-one, it's a bit difficult to get people to stop multitasking.
For sure.
Yeah, my wife is a paraeducator, works with kids on the autism spectrum in schools, and when the pandemic first hit, the school system here did a wonderful job, adapting. We're just going to be at home. We're going to keep having meetings. And she would have 2 hours of Zoom meetings. She said, I am beat.
Yeah, that's got to be brutal.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I said, hon, you're doing it on a notebook screen, which means you're looking at 24 postage stamp size people. That's exhausting for your brain. Just that is.
Well, yeah, I remember reading something about like how like. Most communication is like 10% information, and like, the rest is like some sort of nonverbal, whether it's like our intonation and stuff, and like, or it's like body language. And so if you're trying to kind of like, your brain is wired to kind of like
what it is,
do that. And if you're looking at 24 of them, it's overload. Like it just fries your ability to process.
Yeah. Overload. And it's also, I mean, this has been an area of study of mine for quite a long time. One, our brain is wired to do that. We actually have parts of our brain that specifically focus on eyes. Like we're wired to do that. It's not even conscious. Two, and this one intrigues me, there's some gender to it. Guys sitting side by side having a conversation, left to their own devices, will tend to end up at a right angle. So this face-to-face thing is a bit unusual for us. We wouldn't necessarily talk at this 180-degree angle if we were sitting at a bar or having lunch or something like that. Women are, I think, a little more, they tend to be a little more face-to-face in one-to-one conversations.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, isn't it? It's kind of interesting. It makes a little bit of like quasi-evolutionary sense, because you can watch the horizon for saber-toothed tigers or something.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Well, see if that validates in what you see in personal behavior. But for sure, this full focus, lights are on, cameras are on, did a thing like it's a big shift. We're making it, but it's still a big shift. Well, so what's next for NextAfter?
Great question.
Had to have been a good year.
What's that?
It had to have been a good year.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. We're growing like crazy. I mean, like that's the hardest thing right now is just kind of staffing up our team to meet the demand for what we have to offer to the marketplace right now. So
wow,
that's a big challenge. But beyond that, there's two things that I'm kind of really excited about. Number one is we formed a partnership with the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy in the UK. They are home to the world's first two PhDs in philanthropic psychology. And so they're developing a lot of like the academic research around why people give and all this kind of stuff. And like their main thesis is that there's different ways of approaching fundraising, one which actually does harm to the donor. So it's actually not good for their long-term well-being. And there's other ways that may not yield as many results or, revenue today, but actually builds up the well-being of the donor and leads to better lifetime partnerships, right? So churn or attrition is a big problem in our space. And so like, I think a lot of their science kind of is going to fix that. So we appointed the NextAfter fellow at that institute that's actually taking a lot of their research and adapting it into things that we can test online with our clients. And so that's a really exciting thing of like testing all these different theories and stuff and like bringing them home to be able to validate them.
So you may be able to, help in the data and science end of their research, sounds like.
Oh, for sure. That's why it's a great partnership. And that's why they're excited to have us, kind of come alongside.
Oh man, that's wonderful to hear because nobody benefits from this being done poorly.
That's right. That's right.
Like, at all.
That's right. No.
And the the lifetime long-term thing versus churn. Like I've got time at 4 different higher ed institutions. Way too much time in school, and it's a surprise which of them are good at the alumni fundraising outreach and which of them are not as good.
Right.
At the fundraising outreach, and which of them I've kind of bozo filtered because they were so bad at it.
I like that.
And which are still in. It's like the smaller guys are sometimes better at it because they've kept it much more story, person to person, relationship based, and it's not just, oh hi, this is so and so, and I'm an undergraduate in your old department, and we want your money.
Right. What else is new? Right.
Yeah. Exactly. What else is new? Well, Tim, it has been a delight to connect and talk with you. Thanks so much for making the time.
Dr. Dunn, anytime you want to talk email fundraising, I am your guy. So have me back.
We'll do that. We'll wrap it up. I'll hit the end of record. If you're listening, my guest has been Tim Kachuriak, CEO and founder at NextAfter. So if you have a nonprofit that you think needs help with their digital fundraising, send them to nextafter.com. Thanks, Tim.
Awesome. Thank you.